Hey guys, I'm Evan and this is Magnolias and Sunlight, and today we are on day 14 of DIY or Die, my series where we make a Halloween inspired DIY project every day in the month of October. And today we're gonna work on this pumpkin. So I came up with this idea when I saw this picture on Pinterest and I thought it was too cute and I thought let's make a 3D one. Unfortunately, I planned all of this back in August, and since then I have seen a number of people also make this project online. So I wanted all of these projects to be really unique and special and new for you guys. But you've probably maybe already seen this one, and it's a little too late because we've already got the supplies. So now you just get to see my version. So I picked up this pumpkin at Savers for $3.99, and this is like, she's hefty. She's heavy, she's bottom heavy, she's weighted. It looks like you should be able to light this up, but there's no battery. And apparently it was originally $25 at Target. So I found, like I said, this one thrifted. Check your thrift stores. There's so many of these craft pumpkins sitting around. You're going to need some air dry clay. And I am obsessed with blue and green pumpkins. Like, I think these ones are stunning. I think a blue and white, or like a blue, green, and cream pumpkin display is incredible. So I'm gonna hit this with the Martha Stewart eucalyptus paint that we have used over and over and over, because then our clay is gonna be white and we're going to make a ghost pumpkin. So let's dive in and start painting this. It's going to need probably a couple coats and a decent amount of dry time. So that will be step one. Let's get to painting. So I have my paint. It's all shaken up, and I got the big paintbrush today. This is a lot of surface area to cover, so here we go. You could also spray paint this and it would probably go a lot faster, but here we are. I haven't found a spray paint this color that I like. If you have a like eucalyptus green that you recommend, I would love to hear your brand and color that gives you the same pretty blue-green color. Like I said, I love pumpkins that are this color. I'm hoping when I finish this project we can maybe go buy a couple for the porch, because we don't have any pumpkins outside. I've been too busy with all of these projects, and it's still so hot. I don't think the pumpkins would do well yet. So technically, because this is my last jar of this paint and I don't think they make this anymore, I'm just going to paint this part where the eyes and the mouth are going to be, like the part that you're going to see through our ghost face, and then the bottom, because the rest of it is going to be covered by clay, and I see 0 point in wasting paint to cover something that's already going to be covered by another material. It's kind of like, why wallpaper a whole wall and then cover the bottom with chair rail or something, you know? So we're gonna just cover the part of the pumpkin that is going to be visible with some margins, because I don't know how the clay is gonna fall just yet. So while I was hoping this paint would cover in one coat, it in fact did need 2 full coats, 3 in some areas, you know, a little touch up here and there. So I went ahead and finished this up, let it dry, and then painted a second coat of paint and then let that dry completely, because we didn't want to put clay onto wet paint. We wanted this like base to be really, really solid and dry. So then we pull out our clay, and I'm just using like the Crayola brand air dry clay, and I take the whole thing out because we're going to use a decent amount of clay. I am making a rather large pumpkin, so obviously this will be dependent on the size of your pumpkin and how far down you want that drippy wax look to go. I found that it helped to start with a ball of clay. So I start out by rolling that up and getting rid of all the air bubbles. I'm not really super concerned about kneading it out like you would if you were throwing a bowl or something, but I did want to try and pound out as many air bubbles and pockets as possible. Starting with this ball, we're going to use our rolling pin to start flattening it out and making a large pizza shape. You're kind of like, honestly, you're making pie crust here. You're making pie crust or pizza dough. So kind of like I just said, we're making pizza dough. We're also going to then cut this into pie slices, pizza slices. I roll them up like this, and then I cut off the tip of our slice, and then I roll it back down onto the pumpkin. So we're going to use that top piece to kind of meld around the stem. And then I just found that this was the best way to get that round shape out of a flat piece of clay. And then we're obviously going to stretch it and mold it and make it the shape that we want. But you can just go all the way around the pumpkin, placing these slices. You're going to get that drippy effect naturally because our circle wasn't a perfect circle around the bottom. And then we'll go in and kind of clean up these seams. So there at the end, I ended up with an area that wasn't covered. So I just take a little bit more clay, make a flat shape, and then just fill in whatever spaces were not covered by our initial pizza slices. So now I am going to make a coil. That's what this is called when you roll out a snake shape or whatever you want to call it. In pottery class, it's called a coil. So we're going to roll that out, and I ran out of cutting board space on this one. I highly recommend everyone get a crafting cutting board. Treat yourself to a new cutting board for your kitchen and steal your favorite one for your crafts. And then we're going to take this coil, and then I'm just going to really define that drippy edge. The edge of our clay slices wasn't necessarily drippy enough for my liking, so I'm using this, and then I put a chunkier spot where you can see there's still some paint showing, or like the white of the pumpkin showing, because I'm going to completely cover that. But this is going to be our drippy wax edge, and I'm using this to really build out that shape so that we get those really defined drippy points. All right, so this is where things get messy, which is funny because it's the part where we're going to clean up our pumpkin. So using some water, using water on clay really helps smooth things out. So I have a little container of water, and then I'm just using my fingers to work the clay, clean up those seams. I just kind of smooth them into one another to create one solid looking surface. And I loved the way that this pumpkin looked. It really looked like it was modeled after a real pumpkin. And so I'm working the clay into all of those ribs of the underneath pumpkin, all of the bumps. I really wanted that to come through so it looked like the wax was dripping over and really adhering to that exact shape. But at the same time, I want it to be its own layer. So I'm not meshing the clay into the bottom of the pumpkin. I'm keeping about 1/4 of an inch at the bottom, so there's like a lip where the clay is. It's not going to be smushed straight into the edge of the pumpkin. And I used my fingernail to really go through and clean up that edge, make sure that it was still defined and it looked like there was, a wax strip coming down the pumpkin. So we don't want to blend the edge. We want it to have that really like kind of gloopy almost look. So you just go through and take your time with this, put on some music, put on a movie, enjoy the process. This is a project where you get to get your hands dirty and you get to be creative and you just get to play with the shape of the clay until it makes you happy and it's giving you the shape that you want. There's nothing worse than using your hands on especially an air dry or a Sculpey project when you get to this point and it's covered in fingerprints and you can see where you worked the clay with your hands. And to me, that's like the number one sign that something is handmade, homemade. So I am taking a lot more water and I am actually smoothing everything down. Not only does this really push the clay down into that drippy effect that we're looking for, but it's getting rid of the gloopy parts. It's getting rid of the parts where you can see where my hands and my fingerprints were. And it's really just giving one last smoothing effect by adding all of this water. You just want to go through and do one last quick touch up, make sure all of your seams are closed. There are a few areas where I felt like we needed to fill in. So this is kind of your problem solving stage. So solve all the problems because the next stage is where we're going to really clean things up and start cutting out our face. So speaking of cutting out the face, I used a butter knife, but you could use clay tools. I don't know why I didn't use my clay tools. I have a pottery wheel in my garage and I have all of those things at hand. You'll see them in a minute. I grabbed my sponge from my pottery kit, but I ended up using a butter knife, which is probably more, common for someone to have. And I start by cutting a triangle. And then I just go in and smooth it out. Obviously, we've been left with a really jagged edge. We just worked really hard to smooth out the clay. And you want it to look really rounded and in line with the rest of the project. So I use the butter knife to kind of really define those corners. And then I go in with my finger and a little bit more water to smooth everything out, get that rounded shape around the corners. And the nose was probably the hardest part, but I feel like in any craft project or art project, the nose is the thing I always struggle with. I can't draw them, I can't paint them, I can't carve them into a pumpkin. So it got a little too close to the edge, so I did end up going back and adding in a little bit of extra clay down at the bottom so that it looked cohesive and like it had some symmetry. But that's basically the process. You just add and subtract and add and subtract and smooth until you're happy with the face and the shape of your pumpkin. So here is the sponge that I mentioned. This is out of my pottery kit, and if you don't have a pottery kit, you just need a really soft sponge. You don't want one that you're going to use to like scrub dishes. You want the soft side, and you're going to dip it in your water and then squeeze out most of the water. You just want like a dampened sponge. And this is the final cleanup phase. So you're going to go through and this will get rid of all of your fingerprints. It will get rid of all of the points where you accidentally bumped into the clay. It will get rid of all of your imperfections. And so that is the last step for our clay. So while I clean up this pumpkin, I want to talk to you guys about how you clean up the mess that you see underneath the pumpkin. This is clay. This is like a sediment product. It is a natural clay. You don't want to put this in your kitchen sink. Washing a little bit off your hands isn't going to be an issue, but I highly recommend taking all of this out. I took all of this outside and sprayed it down with my hose. Chunks of clay can build up in your pipes. So just be aware of that when you're doing clay projects. This is not something that you want to, like I said, dump down the kitchen sink. You might end up with some plumbing problems afterwards, and that's no fun. So after I have washed all of this up, I come back with a clean sponge, and then I just start wiping down the bottom. Because we used so much water and we cleaned up the clay, it did kind of get all over our pumpkin. At the end, I did go back in and do some touch-up painting, but this really helped get rid of a lot of the mess and a lot of the, the clay streaks that showed up. Maybe you like that. A lot of people try and get that baking powder effect on their paint products, but it just seemed a little like heavy in some areas. So I went through with my sponge, a clean sponge, and tidied that up. And I also did the stem because from moving around, it had a lot of clay on there as well. All right, guys. And this is our finished product. It's still a little wet. I went in and touched up the paint. It's been really humid here. We have a bunch of storms blowing through. So this clay is taking a lot longer to dry. But I think that's okay because the slower it dries, the less likely it is to crack. So I'm really thrilled. This is exactly what I wanted to add to my Halloween decor. And I hope you guys enjoyed this project, this little drippy candle pumpkin. And I will see you guys tomorrow with day 14. Bye.